For the Millennial Way show, I am Ismael Trevino. Our next guest is a 24 times Emmy Award-winning producer and 2-time Peabody Award-winning writer and producer. His name is Ira Rosen, and in his new book, Ticking Clock, he reveals the intimate, untold stories of his decades at America's most iconic news show. It's a 60-minute story on 60 Minutes itself. Mr. Rosen created a masterclass in how TV news is made. He shows readers how 60 Minutes puts together a story when sources are explosive, unreliable, and even dangerous. Highly entertaining, dishy, and unforgettable. Ticking Clock is a never-before-told account of the most successful news show in American history. Today, Ira Rosen joins us. 24-time Emmy Award-winning producer Ira Rosen, welcome to the Millennial Way show.
Thanks for having me. This is great to be here.
Ira, before we dive deep...
Tell me...
Yeah, just go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, one of the things that interested me about doing your show is that you're interested in the creative process of being a producer. And I think that's such a smart approach, because you can't be a 60 Minutes producer without first getting the person to agree to go on camera. And the way you do that is to make yourself a likable person. And, people are trained to go like, when they're selling something, but it's much tougher when you're sitting there with a gangster, a head of an organized crime family, or a president of the United States, and to try to make yourself likable inside of 3 minutes. And the trick of doing that is to be a good listener and to be able to have a conversation with somebody. And a lot of times people who do interviews and journalists, they want to get through their questions, and they miss so many opportunities about where the conversation can go. And sometimes it goes in such fascinating and interesting places.
That's true. Actually, that was the way that we could make it possible, this interview. So that's why we really appreciate your time. Ira, before we dive deep into your book, I just want to know, where are you right now, and how are you dealing with this global pandemic? Any learning, any lesson you want to share with us?
Oh yeah, well I'm vaccinated now, and I was with a person today who was about 70 years old, who also was vaccinated, and I would never in a million years have been in the same car with him. And today I felt very comfortable being in the car with him. We rolled the windows down, of course, but we were in masks and we had, normal conversations. It's a freeing experience. Have you been vaccinated yet?
Actually, not yet.
Have you been vaccinated?
Not yet. I think in my area, next week we're gonna start, because of the age. We're gonna be allowed to. So yeah, we're right. Finger crossed to make it happen. Yes. Ira.
That's great. Yeah, but yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that the first year was really, really hard because, you were isolated. You were worried about getting the virus. You were worried about giving it to others if you got it. And so I think now that the vaccines are out there, it's a much freer experience. I mean, I'm spending the next few weeks visiting friends who I haven't seen in a year. I'm driving up from Florida to New York, stopping off and visiting friends everywhere who I was just with an old producer who I used to work with in ABC in Jacksonville. I'm going to visit some friends tomorrow who I haven't seen in a long time. Then I'm going to see an old friend who I haven't seen in a decade in Charlottesville. So this is a real freeing experience. I think you're going to see a lot of Americans taking road trips when they haven't done before. Europe, as we know, is closed to us. It's open, but it's very difficult to get there and to do things. But you're going to see a lot more people being much more social, because they miss that social activity that they haven't had in a year.
That's true. That's true. Totally agree. Totally agree. Ira, I want to dive deep a little bit on your book, Ticking Clock. The details, the stories behind the stories. I'm reading it, and it's just brilliant. What can you tell us about the key elements or your top secret or strategies to a great interview?
The strategy for a great interview is to be able to listen and to be able to pivot. So a lot of people, let's say like tonight, you had a plan, but what if I decided to throw you a complete curveball and start talking to you about baseball? So what you do is you need to go and be able to say, what is it about baseball that's so interesting to you? I find it the most boring sport. And what you do is when you're with a person, you got to go and kind of let them take the lead. It's almost like dancing. You know, as a reporter, you're so used to being the lead dancer, but let the other person lead you and be prepared. What I learned from Mike Wallace is he prepared enormously for interviews, but he also was prepared to throw his questions away and be able to go down a road. I mean, we did one interview, I remember, with a GAO General Accounting Office investigator. And I said, this is going to be a very tough interview. The guy doesn't want to give up this information. And Mike walked into the room, sat down and looked at the guy and basically instantly knew exactly what to say. And what he said was, I don't have a lot of time. I got to make it back to New York and catch the shuttle here. We were in Washington. And you better do this interview and you got 3 minutes. Go. And it was like that. And we got everything we needed in the 3 minutes, and Mike took his microphone off and left the room. And it was brilliant. We could have sat there for 2 hours and not gotten what he got in those 3 minutes. And it's being able to pivot and being able to be perceptive. And I think that's the most important word in doing a good interview, is being perceptive to who you're talking with.
In your book, and I love that answer, thank you very much. In your book, you talk about the search of the big story. Is there a pattern or a key to identify these kind of stories before anyone else?
Yeah, you got to do a story that you'd watch yourself. So when you sit down, you can't make believe, oh, I'm going to be, let's say you're a chef, right? Oh, I hate this food. They'll like it. I'm cooking it for them. No. You have to do something that you yourself would want to watch, that you yourself would want to be interested. And in my crazy brain, I'm interested in assassinations, UFOs, mafia, con men, people who are criminals. I have kind of a weird, interest levels. And if I find it interesting, I bet I can make it interest to you. And that's the secret of a good 60-minute story, is to make it interesting so that you'd want to watch it. And you always want to leave the person wanting more. You want them to basically, at the end of it, to say, the reaction to my book, if you read some of the Amazon comments, which are quite amazing, the reaction has been, when are you going to write your second book? This book ended too early. I mean, it's a 300-page book. And people are saying, it ended too early. So, that's what you want to hear when you're doing the 60 Minutes piece. You want them to sort of want more. And that's the trick.
You just mentioned your fascination about UFOs stories. I had the opportunity on the Millennial Way show to interview a professor of Harvard. I don't know, maybe you already interviewed him or you have heard about him, Professor Avi Loeb. He's the head and the chair of the astronomy department in Harvard, and he wrote a latest book, like few months ago, called Extraterrestrial. What's your take on extraterrestrial intelligent life?
So here's my belief, and you're going to think I'm maybe crazy, but I don't care. So I believe it's easier to believe that out of all those thousands of pictures that are out there, at least of UFOs, and I find that to be much more believable than all those thousands and thousands of pictures out there that have been faked. I don't believe there's an industry out there of people faking UFO pictures. I just don't believe that. I think that there are some people out there who do fake it. They throw a frisbee up and they put a light on it or something, or a dish pan is another way to fake it. But I think that if you look at all the UFO pictures, do you believe that every single one of them has been faked? Or do you believe that maybe a couple of them might be the real deal? I say that I believe that a couple of them might be the real deal.
Actually, me too. let me go back to the question that I have. And thank you very much for that answer, Ira. Ira, you made interviews with world-class guests from all around the world. How you connected with them? How you reached them when there was at that point no internet, no cell phones? Is there a manual you used to reach these guests that regular people would think that are unreachable?
Well, a lot of times you just would go visit them. One of the people who taught me a lot in the business was a guy named Cy Hirsch, who was a New York Times reporter. And Cy Hirsch used to meet people in the beginning in the morning. It's like 6 a.m. as they're going to work. And then he'd be waiting at their house when they got home from work. And so they think he's there all day long. They don't know. But it's the persistence of the person. And finally, they just say, fine, come on in. Let's talk. I mean, it took me 4 years to get John Gotti Jr. to agree to go on camera. And that is taking dinners with him, listening to him, visiting him. He'd say, hey, what are you doing tonight? Let's go get dinner. So you drop everything. You drop plans with your wife. You go to visit him. You have to be prepared to do that. It takes a long time. Steve Bannon, another person who was the president's advisor, I used to fly down on Saturdays just to hang out with him in the White House. It was Saturday night. Ryan Priebus would be having date night with his wife. Jared Kushner would be observing the Sabbath. And we'd have the West Wing to ourselves and be drinking Diet Cokes and talking. And then I'd leave, go to a bar, write down the notes extemporaneously, and then fly back the next morning to New York. And that's what you have to do to put it in. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, you can't just show up and say, hey, I'm Ira Rosen, let's do an interview. It takes, there's sometimes years and years of developing trust.
Ira, how do you see the power of social media as a potential tool nowadays to reach these so-called unreachable potential guests?
Right, and social media right now has changed everything, and not necessarily for the good, because what now is everybody could be a broadcaster, everybody could blog, everybody could post something. And the problem is a lot of people don't know the difference between something being published by the New York Times or Washington Post and something being published by somebody blogging in their pajamas from their bedroom. And that's how the whole thing of a lot of these crazy things that came out about, pedophile rings in the bottom of a pizza parlor in Washington. I mean, these crazy stories. I mean, that's how a lot of that surfaced, because, people wouldn't differentiate the written word. There are credible sources, and, it's so important to go back to the old media in many ways, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS News, which has a lot of credibility, and you need to put them at a higher level of belief than somebody who just posts something. There's craziness that gets posted, and that's the real downside of social media at the moment.
Totally agree. Ira, in your book, you talk about lessons learned. Having you legendary Mike Wallace as your teacher, even though you have your pros and cons, and you made them very, very clear in the book, what can you tell us about the most valuable lessons he gave you?
what Mike taught me was you have to build up an air of confidentiality around an interview, that you have to basically feel and make the person who you're talking to believe that you and him or her are the only two people in the world. And you also have to ask the hardest questions first, because once when you do that, the person relaxes and feels a little bit at ease. And you could go back to it later in the interview. There's no law that says you can't. But Mike always wanted to get that out first. And then he'd say, see, that wasn't so bad. And then the person would relax and they'd have a conversation. And the key is sometimes you just let a person talk. Mike said to me a long time ago, there's no embarrassing questions, only embarrassing answers. And that was sort of the way he did it, because he would ask the most insane questions sometimes. And the people would answer it. Instead of saying next, he would just do that. And his genius was looking at a total stranger and knowing exactly what button to push that would drive them crazy. And, whatever it would be, he'd pick on their clothes, he'd pick on their haircut, he'd pick on whatever it would be, education or something that they once said. He'd repeat something. And a lot of times when you say something, sometimes you say stupid things, then he says, you really believe that? And then you try to defend it. And then you realize, God, this is stupid. I can't defend that statement I made. And then you dig yourself deeper in the hole. And that was Mike's genius.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Ira, in your years of experience, how important is the process in the production, the pre-production, finding the guests of the follow-up, the concept of the follow-up when you were getting those world-class guests?
The follow-up is probably the most important thing, because when you're doing a interview, you're telling a story. And a lot of times what you want to do is you want to get the information in a question. But what's very important when you're doing these interviews is you have to know the answers. So what I would do is I would pre-interview a guest and I would know what the answers are. And then you would plot the follow-up questions that would basically create conversations, but in many ways would also make the person look really, make your correspondent look good. Because said, well, you said you didn't take the money, but I have here a document that in fact shows you did. Here it is, Mr. Jones. And, so the follow-up is really where the story reveals itself. And that's the key to 60 Minutes, was always the follow-up.
In your book, Ira, you shared crazy, amazing stories. What would you say was your best interview and why?
Well, probably the interview we did with John Gotti Jr. Because here was a guy who ran the Gambino crime family longer than his father, who was the most notorious gangster in the history of New York, John Gotti. And John spent a long time thinking about what he was going to say. And when he said it, he told the story of life inside the mob. His characterizations were almost poetic. So he gave you this extraordinary insight into the world of the mafia, but he also had a narrative about quitting the mafia. So you had a guy who was into the mob, who rose to the heights of it, but then gave it all up. And gave it, and quit the mob. And so there was an extraordinary arc to the story. And that made it, we started it by doing two parts. When it aired, it became the full hour of 60 Minutes, and we reran it 3-4 times on key nights of the year. That's how it resonated. And what was so interesting about it is after it aired, I got calls from former police chiefs of the New York City Police Department who said, oh, I love that interview. I said, you love the interview? You were trying to put this guy in jail for the last few years. Oh yeah, but he's a really colorful, interesting guy. I mean, that's when you know you hit it,
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Ira, what's that interview that you never could make it, and why you could not score it?
Oh boy, probably Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was the great American actor who acted in The Godfather, and I developed a relationship with him. And it took we would call each other and have long conversations. Finally, I got him to agree to go to dinner with Mike Wallace and myself in LA. And we're driving down Mulholland Drive, and he's running every single red light. And I'm saying to him, Marlon, what are you doing? And he said, you're going to let a machine tell you what to do? Be a man. And so we finally get to the restaurant, and Marlon turns to Mike Wallace and says, you're a great actor. And Mike says, I'm not an actor, I'm a journalist. He said, Marlon says, stop it. You're an amazing actor. The raised eyebrow, the look of astonishment. I've studied you. So Mike changes the subject and says to him, how did you get so fat? Marlon Brando was a big, huge guy. And he said, well, I go to Baskin and Robbins and I can't decide what flavor of ice cream I want. So I went order a quart of everything, and I end up bringing it home and I end up eating it all. At which point Mike says, Marlon, I'm 67 years old. I don't need to show America what an asshole you are. Let's be friends. And I was so angry about that. And Marlon and I stopped talking for a period of time, but we had one final conversation. And he says to me, do you play the stock market? And I said, I don't have much money. I play a little bit. He said, let me give you a tip. What's that? Buy this company. What company? Apple. I never heard of it. You will. I'm telling you. Put your money in Apple. You won't go wrong. So I go back and I tell Wallace. I said, he told me about this company called Apple. And Mike said, you going to buy the stock? And I said, are you crazy? Why would I take a stock tip from a guy who can't decide what flavor ice cream he wants? And so I never bought Apple, and I never got Marlon Brando.
Jesus, so that's a double fail. Ira, why you left 60 Minutes? Why you left 60 Minutes, and why you decided to go back? That you also tell that in the book.
Well, sure. I left in 1989. For the simple reason is that Mike and I were at wit's end. Our relationship was ending. If I didn't leave, he would probably have fired me. He wanted to trade me in for a younger model, and I was only 34. And for him, I was like, he was done with me. And I went to ABC, where I was senior producer of Primetime Live, and ironically ended up working with his son, Chris Wallace. And then I came back because I really missed producing. Being a producer on 60 Minutes is the single best job there is in TV. And you get it's like having a license to kill. And you're like Superman. When you're saying, hi, Ira Rosen, I'm with 60 Minutes, you get people out of jail. You put people in jail. You expose corruption. You fix mental retardation centers or VA hospitals. It's an extraordinary power that the show gives you. And I miss that. And that's why I returned.
Perfect. Ira, last question, and I really appreciate your time for today with our audience. What will be your best advice to all the new generation of producers, students of journalism that are watching you right now, not only in the United States, but in Latin America, in Europe, through all our social media platforms, to become great, legendary producers as you did?
Learn to tell a story. Learn to tell a story verbally, and learn to tell a story in writing. Practice your writing. Have people who can mentor you. And learn from them. Not every mentor teaches you the same lesson. People, the mentors I've had, each one of them gave me a different gift. And the most important thing is learn to be a great storyteller. Tell your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your parents, and if they start to look away or look at their phone or eyes glaze over, you're not making a good story. Always leave the audience wanting more. which is a perfect way to end this one because I'm going to leave your audience wanting more.
So they're only going to read your book.
Thanks for having me.
Ira, thank you very much, Mr. Ira Rosen, 24 Emmy Award-winning producer. Actually, where do you have all your 24 awards?
I have it in my home, but my wife and I built a shelf for 20. And so when I got the extra 4, we gave it away to our kids and stuff. We didn't have space for it. It's a good problem to have.
I can tell. Ira, thank you very much. It was such an honor, such a pleasure. Amazing book. Congratulations. I have it here. So thank you very much. Until the next one.
Buy it on Amazon. It's on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. It's a good book. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Until the next one. Well, there you had it. Mr. Ira Rosen. What a legend. What an amazing guest. His latest book, Ticking Clock, the behind scenes at 60 minutes, is a highly powerful recommended book. It's a masterclass for all journalists or producers. And well, this interview, you can watch it completely, full and edit on our YouTube platform. And also, you can see bites, little bites through all our social media platforms. In Instagram, in Twitter, Facebook, also in sound, in podcast, in Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and the rest of the platforms. This is the Millennial Way Show, empowering the new generations. Until the next one.